You are listening to We Are the Compassionate Revolution. I'm your podcast host, therapist, author, boundaries guide, Molly Moon. If you are a compassionate person and you want to know your worth, set better boundaries, live from your truth, and operate in your fullness, then I am so glad you've joined us. You ready? Let's get started. What happens when the systems we've trusted, systems that shaped our beliefs, our identities, and our choices, start to crack? And not just one system, but all of them. Religion, politics, justice, relationships, you name it, it's shaking. Suddenly, what may have once felt like bedrock now feels like sand. In this episode, we're talking about what it means to wake up inside of dysfunctional systems and what kind of courage it takes to question it, leave it, or try to change it. And by the way, for the sake of definitions, I'm saying that a system is any group of people, roles, rules, or patterns that are interconnected and influence one another. So in psychology, this can refer to a family, a workplace, a religious group, a political party, or even an entire culture. Systems are held together by shared beliefs, by spoken and unspoken rules, by power dynamics or hierarchy, by emotional roles, and every individual within the system affects and is affected by it. Healthy systems support growth, accountability, and connection. Healthy systems are very good for humans to be in. They support life. Dysfunctional systems resist change, suppress questions, and prioritize stability over truth. And while dysfunctional systems may seem good in the moment, because sometimes they do, in the long term, they are not good for humans. They do not support life, and the humans within them experience numerous symptoms that indicate the harm being done by that system. I have some loved ones who've been devout in their faith for a long, long time. And recently, we're having a beautiful conversation. And they shared that they've actually been in the quiet process of leaving their faith. I don't know if it's right to say that they're leaving their faith because they're not leaving spirituality and they're not necessarily leaving their beliefs either. But they're leaving the organized religion part of it. They have. Because of the hypocrisy and the inconsistencies and the lack of accountability that they kept running into. And they tried everything to help change things before they realized, oh, the system itself does not want to change. It's designed to be this way. And these are people who live their faith, who take their faith seriously. But that's exactly why they had to start asking serious questions and eventually questioning their participation in it at all. I was talking with another friend of mine who's also leaving his faith in a totally different group. And he was talking about some of the things he'd exposed in his long journey out as he finally gave himself permission to ask tough questions. And one of the things that hit him the hardest in a practical way was the amount of money his religious group brought in on a yearly basis. As in, it was big business. Big business. And he's like, wait, what? At the end of the day, is this whole thing just actually an incredible business model? Gaining profit for all the wrong reasons? Gaining profit by hooking people in through weaving in some spiritual truths to a whole lot of things that were not true? That hurts to see. Talk about a heartbreaking realization, when you've poured your heart and soul into what you thought was bedrock truth, only to find that in some ways you're actually just being played. You've just been played. And this isn't just happening in the faith world. It's happening everywhere. Those are just conversations I happen to have recently, so they're fresh on my mind. But this is happening in almost every single system, group, or structure that exists. I know when it comes to politics, I'm watching people who have had really strong opinions and a deep loyalty for their party of choice now undergoing a massive change. I have loved ones who are conservative and they're stepping back as they watch their political party behave in ways that are openly dishonest with no regard for who it hurts. And it's so easy to point the finger at the failures of everyone else, but when your own camp is violating all the values you claim to hold dear, there comes a time when the most loving thing we can do, the most honest thing we can do, is to stop focusing all of our energy on pointing the finger out there and start focusing on the problems on our own side of the street. But that's not usually viewed as helpful, is it? That's viewed as disloyal. So it takes some courage and some grit to decide to get honest about the way things are inside of our own preferred groups. Because our group might very well kick us out if we do that. Because questions are not welcome inside of dysfunctional groups, and neither is accountability. I find the parallel between religion and politics incredibly interesting because when things get dysfunctional, they actually have some strong similarities. Once you identify your sense of self with a particular group, the brain usually closes down most of its critical thinking skills and its ability to ask hard questions. In a way, it can be really similar to having a favorite sports team. Once you pick your favorite team, you're supposed to cheer for them no matter what. Your brain is no longer team shopping. So it shuts down thinking in that area because you've chosen your team now. You wear their colors, you cheer for them to win. They're the good guys, everybody else is the enemy. You're biased towards them. And things would have to get really, really bad for you to question whether or not you still want to be with that team. Well, when it comes to sports, yes, most people stick with their team no matter what, but there's an important psychology lesson for us here. Because loving your favorite sports team isn't really that big of a deal when it comes to something like football, say. It might even be fun. But it is a really big deal when it comes to our allegiance to systems and structures that wield the power of life and death. Because the psychology of our allegiance to the systems we love is often the exact same as it is for our favorite sports team. When our favorite political party or religion or whatever system it is that we are identifying with and believing in, as soon as we psychologically view them as our team and identify with them, we stop asking questions, and instead we just wear the colors and we cheer when the other team is destroyed in the game. It kind of doesn't even matter what our team does. We're going to cheer for our team and we're going to be against the other team. This is our team. These are our colors. This is who we cheer for. You can kind of see it. Our critical thinking is shut off. Our intuition is shut off. Our ability to ask hard questions and check in with our heart and make sure the whole thing's still aligned with our values, that's shut off because we've identified ourselves with that team, that system. So now we can't question it. And this is when things can get really scary because that's when the humans just get swept along in the tide of whatever their group is doing. And they forget to stop and ask if what's happening is actually good for humans, good for all the humans. Instead, they become concerned simply with what is good for our team. Is this good for all the humans? Is this good for the next generation to come and the one after that? We don't care. We're just happy, quote, quote, our team won. And I don't mean to pick on religion here at all, by the way. I just happened to have those two conversations recently with folks I never thought I'd see leave organized religion. They're who you want in organized religion. I mean, they're truly good people. They practice what they preach. They live it. But because of that, they finally had to walk out. And I'm seeing the same thing with loved ones of mine who are now questioning their political party. So many of our systems are big businesses too. We don't think about them like that. We don't think about politics like that. We don't think about many of our beloved bastions of stability like that, but you can see it once you start asking questions. Here's a very, very small example. Let's look at the privatization of prisons. Again, just one small example of many. When we turn prisons into private businesses, that means the business owners make more money when there is more crime and harsher sentencing laws. So if those business owners are smart and they want to make more money, they're going to lobby for harsher sentencing laws. They're going to spend their money trying to get the legal system to arrange itself in a way that benefits their business. And they can, and they will. And maybe they might even do it under the guise of wanting to help the country be safer. So it seems fine on the outside. It's marketed well, right? But the truth of it is that increased incarceration and mandatory minimum sentences means more money made. It's good for business, which means it's not about justice. It's about profit. We've now incentivized incarceration, not rehabilitation, right? And the country's people are actually less safe because of that, but because most people aren't going to realize that, since it's been hidden under layers and layers of complex arrangements, it's allowed to happen. And that's just one thing in one system. But once you start seeing the dysfunction built into the system, it's awful hard not to start seeing it in more and more places. And yet this realization creates for us an even greater sense of emotional instability and existential stress. Because we're humans, we like clear duality. It feels good to our brains. Where our brains are at, it feels really good to have everything nice and clear, neat little boxes, up or down, yes or no, right or left, either or. Two simple choices, no complexity. I don't know if you did this when you were little, but when I was little, playing childhood games, there would be good guys and bad guys. The age-old story of good versus evil. Two choices. Nothing complex. Of course, we are the good guys because we have to be, and the good guys are supposed to win. It's all easy, it's simple, it's clear. I'm in the good group, not the bad group, so whatever my group does is right because we're the good guys, so it has to be. Makes everything so clear, even while it's radically wrong. In America, where I live, oh my goodness, what an absolute mess we're in. Because we're in this very strange space where we really can't pretend everything is fine anymore on a wide scale. It's not simple. We are seeing the layers and layers of complexity and dysfunction exposed. There's no simple illusion of duality to turn to. Everything that promised easy answers is crumbling, which is good for our overall evolution and growth, but it's also terrifying and hard. As we watch many systems and structures that were long held as infallible, unbreakable, solid, they're crumbling and breaking under the strain of it. And today I want to give you a really helpful metaphor that has given me a way of understanding what's happening right now, that has given me a great sense of peace, even with all the awfulness going on, and a sense of direction and vision. And I got this when I got my book. My book that's coming out soon, it actually came to me in the form of a vision, like a waking dream, so to speak, that unfolded beautifully and clearly. I was told to write it. I'll talk about that more later, and I'll be sure to let you know when it's going to be available in stores, by the way. I'm so excited about it. But in the process of receiving this book, I was shown that things are not going to get easier. They're going to get more intense. That we as humans are in a massive period of awakening, and it's just getting started. And I'm not the only person who heard this. I know. I actually hear people talking about this all the time right now. So many different healers and leaders have also gotten this message. It's kind of wild. But at the time I got that message, I was the only one I knew of. It was right after COVID. I think so many of us were hoping things would maybe finally go back to some sort of normal. And that was when I heard very clearly that the shaking is just getting started and that all houses of cards are going to fall. I don't know if you've ever used a deck of playing cards to make a little house, but if you haven't, it's kind of fun to do. I encourage you to try it, especially for the sake of this metaphor and its reality. So when you make a house of cards, you take a deck of playing cards, same type of cards you might use to play solitaire or poker or whatever. Take 2 cards and set them up in a triangle, like a little tent. They lean against each other, they hold themselves up because you have them leaning on each other for support. So make maybe a row of 5 of those little tents all lined up in a row, each bottom edge of the tent touching the next one. So it will look like 5 triangles together. Then you carefully lay a line of cards on top of them, flat, in a single row, kind of giving each tent a hat, so to speak. And then you repeat the process. Set up another row of tents, triangles on top of the first one, on top of that flat line of cards. And then you just keep going as high as you want to go, as high as they can go. But you'll notice when you do it, the thing is, when you make a house of cards, you must be very, very, very careful. Because if you bump the table accidentally while you're making them, the whole thing might topple. Because it's sturdy enough to hold up on its own, but only because it's carefully assembled. Because a house of cards is not inherently sturdy. Like you can't just pull out some of the cards to take a closer look at what's on them. Because if you pull out some of the cards, the entire structure is going to collapse. It might look like a supportive structure because it's standing up just fine, but it is still made of flimsy cards, so it cannot withstand much pressure. And as for the cards themselves, not one of them can be moved, not one of them can be questioned, not one of them can be changed, because if you try to change even just one, the whole entire structure will collapse. Do you see the metaphor here? When you have something, a system that seems sound, but is actually just a house made of cards, it's going to be inherently resistant to you taking a closer look at what's going on. You can't take a closer look at even one of the cards. The system is inherently resistant to change and will see you as a threat when you try to do so. So we can apply this metaphor to many of our systems, from the micro to the macro. And one way this shows up is when there's a high resistance to curious questions. A healthy system can allow for questions, totally. An unhealthy system cannot. You can see this really, really easily in an abusive marriage, for example. Whoever's being abused, they are not allowed to ask questions of the person abusing them. The person who's being abused, it would be a fair question to ask, hey, why do you get respect, but I don't get respect? And why can you do whatever you want, but I can only do what you allow me to do? Well, those are really fair questions. But if you're in an abusive relationship, you can't ask those questions because the system, the house of cards that marriage is, cannot handle them. Or take a fundamentalist religion, for example. You know how there are those questions you simply can't ask inside of anything that's fundamentalist without getting in trouble. Why are women supposed to be in submission to men when women are just as smart and just as capable? No, you cannot ask that question. If you do ask that question, you will not get a satisfactory answer because you're just supposed to trust and obey. Why are you supposed to trust and obey? Because that's the only way it can work. So if you're taking notes, please write this down. One of the biggest tells, one of the most identifying characteristics that something is a house of cards and not a solid, loving system is going to be that it will be highly resistant to fair questions. Because to ask curious questions within a dysfunctional system might cause the collapse of the entire thing. So you can't just say, well, what about this? Or, hey, where's the accountability over here? Because a house made of cards does not allow for that. You can't pull out one card to observe it more closely. And that's a truth that extends across the board and is applicable to any system, structure, or group that is not built from love. Now, when it's built from love, it's different. You have a system then that's built with sturdiness, something that is grounded in what is good for humans, that is strong enough to be able to handle being wrong about some things, because then it's going to be glad to know it's wrong about some things, and it will apologize and make it right and change and adjust so that it's now even better for humans. It will change as new information becomes available. That's what happens with a healthy system. When a system is healthy, you get the benefit of being able to look more closely at each of the pieces if you need to, and there doesn't need to be a strong defense system set up against fair questions. Fair questions are assumed and treated with respect. Feedback is a good thing. But when you have something that is actually just a house of cards, there's an incredibly strong psychological defense system put in place to protect the fragile structure. And things will be set up to reward loyalty, to reward trust and obedience to the structure, and to protect the structure against anyone asking any questions. We can see this in a small scale in a dysfunctional family system, say where there has been childhood sexual abuse. So as a therapist, I saw this over and over again working with adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. When somebody in the family system is preying on children, there's a rule, and the rule in the dysfunctional family system is that it cannot ever be talked about. If that happens in a functional family system, the child will talk about it and the parents will take immediate action. Everyone's horrified and upset and sad, but they will take immediate action towards health and safety. In a dysfunctional family system, there's a rule, and it's not even necessarily a spoken rule. It's an energetic rule that is so strong and so powerful it almost doesn't even need to be spoken. Everybody inside the system just knows. In fact, even after the kids grow up to talk about what happened, it's still taboo. It takes incredible courage. I talked with many people who the first time they ever said anything was with me in therapy. And they still felt so wrong that they were doing something so wrong in saying the words aloud about what happened. Because that's the rule. Nobody can say what happened, and definitely nobody can call the person who did it to account. And yet here's the thing. The abuse has likely happened to multiple people in the family, often for generations. Because they don't talk about it, each one of the victims thinks they're the only one. They're alone in their wound. But the likely truth is that they're sharing a secret. They're not alone. They're all carrying that horrible wound, and it desperately needs to be talked about and brought into the light so that healing and accountability can begin. Not talking about it allows the abuser to go on committing crimes against more and more and more vulnerable children. But it takes a very brave person to open up and say, this happened to me. I want to talk about it. And if there's a way to get justice, I want that too. Because the dysfunctional family rule to keep silence about it is so strong that the person who gets brave enough to say what happened to them is often looked at as the problem. They risk getting the full wrath of the family for breaking a rule about saying what cannot be said. Some are literally lectured about how they're not properly spiritual because they're not practicing forgiveness, that was in the past, they should be over it by now, and that they're ruining the family and ruining people's lives for bringing it up. I kid you not. It's so very wrong. But that group of people has developed a dysfunctional family system that operates like a house of cards. The whole thing is so flimsy and so fragile, it cannot withstand the truth. If you're taking notes, write this down. You cannot question a dysfunctional system because it cannot stand up under the pressure of truth, because it is a house of cards. And you think that your questions are simply about dealing with a wrong that was done, but no. In actual reality, your questions are threatening the entire dysfunctional system. The whole thing will fall to pieces because it's a house of cards, because it's built on principles that cannot stand when judged by the rubric of love. So a dysfunctional system protects its life by guarding against honesty, against accountability, against fair, curious questions, against justice. That's why the dysfunctional family actually believes that the worst thing is not the abuse that happened. The worst thing is you bringing it up and out into the open. They think the person who brings it up is the one who destroyed the family. Now, what everybody in the family doesn't understand is that it's actually a really miserable system to live in. Houses of cards are miserable systems for everybody to live in. And if they would but let it crash, as it should have long ago, they could actually build something so much better. The dysfunctional system is actually blocking the way of building a functional, healthy, honor-based system rooted in love. So removal of the dysfunctional system, while it is definitely messy for a bit, it's very chaotic, it's awful for a bit, but its removal is actually the most loving and wonderful thing that could happen for the whole family, both now and for the generations to come. The opportunities for health and goodness and love just opened up exponentially when the dysfunctional system came down. And if the person who decides to tell the truth is met with other family members who agree with them and they all decide to tell the truth too, it'll usually end up being okay. Even if some of the family is still resistant, it'll be okay. It doesn't require a lot. Just some, just more than one. Some is enough to help break the cycle for the whole family. You can break the cycle for yourself as an individual, but more are needed to break the cycle for the whole entire family. It's kind of neat to know that, though. It doesn't have to be much, just some. And then the family can finally start moving towards health and healing and change. At least some people have to stop agreeing to pretend the House of Cards is actually a good thing. But if only one person comes forward and everyone attacks them, then the person who is the healthiest might even end up feeling worse than they ever did before. Because now they not only have the trauma from what happened, but they also have the trauma of having their entire family system turn on them, even though they are actually the true hero of the family. Even though they did what no one else in the family could gather the courage to do. It's wild, right? Now, that's an example from the smaller scale inside of a family system, but let's think about this on a larger scale. We actually have a lot of power to create real change. But because we humans hang on so tightly to what we know, and because we have been living in a state of fear for so long, it's really hard to see that. We are so acclimated to systems that involve one person or group having power over other people or groups. We're so acclimated to think that might makes right. We're so acclimated to consider normal transactional relationships where one person benefits at the other person's cost. And we're so conditioned to believe that the worst things happen to people who ask questions. The worst things happen to the people who consider new ways of doing things. So we don't ask questions. We keep our dreams and our wishes for a different kind of world to ourselves because it feels like, well, that's impossible. That'll never happen. This is just the way things are. And we instinctively know to just keep the people pleased. That's how you keep your neck off the chopping block. Which is historically accurate, by the way. So we come by this instinct to follow the party line honestly. If only one person asks questions, but everyone else stays committed to believing in the House of Cards, then that one person who speaks up will receive the full force of punishment from the system. One of the biggest missing pieces for compassionate people as we heal and come into our power is boundaries, because we've been trained not to have any. And I've experienced that not only in my own life, but with tons of people I've worked with as a therapist, fellow counselors, physicians, teachers, social workers, people who care. We know we need boundaries, but how? And then if we try to have some, we feel selfish, guilty, or mean. That's why I have such a strong focus on boundaries, because boundaries are integral to our empowerment. But people like us need to discover our boundaries in a way that actually works for our compassionate hearts. And that's what my Boundaries Breakthrough mini course is all about. It's just $19, it's packed with value, and it's so easy to do. You can get the Boundaries Breakthrough mini course at boundaried.com. That's boundaried with a D.com. The link is in the show notes, and I hope you have a blast in the mini course because it was really fun to make for you. I was recently reading about this man named Bruno, who was a scientist and a philosopher in the 1500s, who eventually ended up getting burned at the stake. I think he was about 50, 51, 52 when he was finally killed. And I read about him. I couldn't even believe he managed to live that long because he was doing all sorts of things. Like he proposed that the stars were distant suns like our sun with planets around them like our planets. Ooh, that was absolutely not allowed. That was considered so heretical. It wasn't just his scientific questions that got him burned, though. He also wasn't sure about things like, eternal damnation either, and other viewpoints that simply could not be allowed to be spoken. He was basically a total pain in the ass to the systems in charge, and for whatever reason, he just could not shut his mouth. So he was finally removed. And of course, he was held and tortured for years, and then he was burned alive. Now, such methods are horribly gruesome, but that is the point, because they effectively made it plain to everybody. See what happens? Shut down your brain. And if you can't shut down your brain, at least shut your mouth. Do not openly ask questions like that. Do not openly think. Do not openly wonder about things. Trust and obey, or you will pay. Because terror creates compliance in the herd. And after generations upon generations of terror in a variety of forms, many, many humans became so conditioned to behave this way that we will accept whatever form of existence we can have inside the various houses of cards we're born into. And the house of cards way of living for compassionate people is one of pretty much keep the people pleased. Do what you're told. Just make it all work. Help where you can, because we can't shut off our compassion fully. Help where you can. Direct your compassion towards the people around you who are hurting when you can, as you can, but you can't really do a lot to change anything in a bigger way because you're just a small little thing in a much bigger world that will eat you for lunch if you push too hard. We compassionate people must live and breathe and move inside of these wobbly structures, these dysfunctional, fragile structures we find ourselves in. From a systems perspective, we're literally born into a house of cards within another house of cards within another house of cards within another house of cards. We're actually navigating layers and layers of dysfunctional systems that we must live in, that we must find a way to survive in. And this might even make you think about your own childhood and what happened to you when you asked real questions about why things are the way they are. And even if you get nice answers, the nice answers usually are, it's just the way things are. There's nothing we can do about it. If you didn't have your questions shut down for being bad, wrong, or outrageous. As you grew up, did you reach a certain point where you tried very hard just to stop asking questions? Because many of us did at a certain point. Because why are you going to ask curious questions? Curiosity just gets you in trouble. Asking questions does not keep the people pleased. So for our own sense of safety and survival, we cooperate with this way of life. But in the process, we actually help, and we don't want to do this, but our cooperation helps perpetuate the ongoing lies. Maybe we even get to the point where we believe the lies ourselves, because they tell us that the house of cards is strong and noble. It is worthy of our trust and belief. So many times, eventually, we see the house of cards as being strong and noble and worthy of our trust and belief. Because, maybe the way we see things is wrong. And they're saying, our authorities, our leaders are telling us that this is good, so it must be good, I guess. And we participate with it with the best of intentions. We actually help support it. How can we know any better if the house of cards is all we've ever known? Systemic racism is a good example here, and there's so many, sadly, there's so many different examples, but I'll use one from the United States where I'm from my own family history. So, how Native American and Alaska Native children were subjected to forced schooling, right? They're taken away from their families, sent to boarding schools, where they're stripped of their cultural heritage so that they could be assimilated. My own grandfather had this happen to him. So this isn't like hundreds and hundreds of years ago. And the general public was told this was a positive and loving and right thing to do. That this is to help these children and instill them with the appropriate values and beliefs that befit an American. So the general public, if they even knew it was happening, the general public chose to believe it was a positive, loving thing to do because that's what they were told to think. And then they thought no more about it. Very few people asked the question, if someone tried to do this to my children, how would I feel about it? Think about that question. It's a very simple enough question to ask. There's nothing wild about it. There's nothing strange about it. It's a really fair question. If someone tried to do this to my children, how would I feel about it? Not only would this have been a very simple enough question to ask, if enough people had asked it, they would have all received an answer from within their own hearts that would have been very disturbing, and it would have provoked them to take action to try to get the government to stop doing that. Because it does not take a rocket scientist to know that you would not want your children forcibly taken from you and raised by someone else for 9 months out of every year in a manner that you have absolutely no say over. And if anything bad happens at the school, you have no power to do anything about that either. I mean, some of these kids died. Many of these kids were horribly abused. But the boarding school had ultimate power over the child, but also had zero accountability for whatever happened while your child was there. Would you send your child to a school like that? No. Nobody would. But why didn't most people ask that question? I think there were two big reasons, and there's probably more than that, but these two stand out the most to me. First of all, racism. Because the American people who were given the label of being white, they were already taught to view themselves as kind of a different species than people of color. White supposedly was a better species. So the way that they felt about their children really wasn't comparable to the way a different species would feel, right? People who were given the label of white, they'd been conditioned to think of themselves as very, very different, as more human. And we can't really have empathy for a fellow human if they're not really a fellow human. And then the second reason, I think, and I think this is a reason that does not get talked about enough, the second reason that the general public could not ask that question is because of chronic, ongoing, generational trauma. Because for those who may have had compassion, they knew that fighting the system was a losing battle. Because their own people had lost the very same battle however many generations before their own people had been assimilated. Assimilation was the only way these kids had a chance to survive in dominant culture. Because you know what dominant culture does not do to those who don't assimilate. I think this was the mindset of many people who chose not to say anything. I think this is why they chose not to say anything about many, many horrible things. Because think about it, every single person inside of dominant culture has once belonged, generations back, to a people group who had been conquered and assimilated themselves. They'd already had some just 100 years, some hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years of conditioning built into their DNA to not ask questions, to not buck the powers that be. The new folks on the chopping block were simply the latest in a long line of tragedies. Passivity has been conditioned into the people, so that even if you do feel something's kind of wrong, you're conditioned to shrug your shoulders sadly and say, there's nothing we can do about it. And to believe that the smartest course of action is to accept what the people in charge tell you to believe, and unconsciously, even if you can't admit it to yourself, to unconsciously feel lucky that this time, at least it isn't you or your kids on the chopping block. And I truly believe this very same thing is happening today in different forms. And all that needs to be done is enough humans asking the question from a heart-centered place, honestly. If this was me, how would I feel about these policies? If this was my family or my children, how would I feel about what's happening right now? But if you're going to live in a house of cards, you really can't ask that question, because that question will cause you to stop being so submissive to the system. And this is why I have great compassion for those who do not yet have the strength to ask those questions. I want to help them gain the strength to ask those questions, but I also have great compassion for those who do not. And we have to stop believing the lie that all people who are not asking questions are just hateful and mean and evil and bad. Because when you understand how trauma works, and then when you take a look at the long history of our world, a whole lot of things make a lot more sense, even up to this present day. Many people who are doing nothing are not hateful. They're just still frozen. They're still in that frozen trauma state caused by generations upon generations of trauma. But they can wake up. They are waking up. We are waking up, and love is how we wake up, not judgment, not blame. When we really start seeing all of this with a clear lens, we will see how the victims of these dysfunctional systems have been endless. These houses of cards have been chewing people up and spitting them out for what? at least 5,000 years of known history. But now something is changing. Something is changing and a whole lot of us are feeling it. The systems built on patriarchy, on this idea of power over and hierarchy and might makes right, they're crumbling. And we're all seeing the grossness of it right in front of our faces right now, right? Profit over people? Wait, what? What is the point of profit over people? That's the power and the pain of the internet, right? We can't look away from these gross injustices anymore. We can't be kept ignorant anymore. So we see all these horrible things happening, things that have happened over and over and over again in human history, but could be more covered up. Well, those things can't be so easily covered up anymore. Can you imagine if the takeover of Hawaii happened right now? We'd all be seeing it for what it is. It wouldn't have been able to be so hushed up. So now we still see thousands and thousands and thousands of good, well-intentioned people ducking their heads and supporting the ongoing existence of these dysfunctional systems, not asking questions, just knee-jerk supporting what they're told is the way to do things. But as soon as we become trained in trauma, it begins to make more sense. Do what you're told and keep the people pleased. Keep the people in power pleased is truly a survival strategy. You raise your head up, you get smacked down. So it's burned into our bones. Keep your head down and don't ask questions. That becomes our literal posture. But the most tragic thing happens because of that. We become part of the dysfunctional system because we are the compliant body that the House of Cards needs to keep propping itself up so that it can continue to survive, just like in a dysfunctional family. The ones who see the abuse happening to the children but choose to look away and not say anything end up being complicit in the abuse, right? And this sucks so badly because the abuse is not their fault. Being put in the awful position they're put in isn't their fault either. They didn't ask for it. And the whole entire thing is desperately and terribly unfair. And yet, because they're in that system, because they see what's happening, looking away and saying nothing makes them complicit. It's not a neutral action. It's an action that supports the ongoing abuse. Because the kids in that system are just kids. They're dealing with the most terror, the most unfairness, the most injustice out of everyone, and they can't stop it in and of themselves because they're kids. They're the ones who are vulnerable. They have no power. They need the ones with power to do something, to take action of some sort. You know, the people being harmed are desperate for someone to see it, ask questions, and do something about it. If the adults who have power and the ability to access resources and to get help, if they don't do anything, the primary victims have no chance. And in a similar way, when vulnerable people groups who do not have access to power are being harmed, the quiet compliance of everybody else is counted on. Look at what's happening right now to multiple different groups of people who are not considered quote, quote, mainstream and therefore are easy to pick on. The people in power who are engaging in harmful acts and violent policies are banking on everybody else to look away. They're banking on us to keep doing what we've been trained to do for generations upon generations. Do not rock the boat, sweep your concerns under the rug, silence your voices, feel like you can't do anything, you're just one small person, do not ask annoying questions about abuses of power, do not call for accountability. They want us to believe there's nothing we can do. And our compliance helps to perpetuate harm. Because when we look away, we keep the system propped up. And this is a hard truth. It is hard. It is unpleasant in the stomach to take this in, I know that. But our compliance helps to perpetuate the ongoing existence of houses of cards from the small scale to the huge worldwide scale. Write it down in your notes and just think about it. Chew on it for a bit. You'll see. But we've been trained not to even see that, right? We've been trained to see ourselves as lacking power. We've been trained to think of ourselves as victims, and we are victims in many ways. I'm not discounting that. We've been trained to be passive, but we're so much more than what they tell us we are. We're not only survivors, we are here to show the world a better way. And that's the purpose of this podcast. The heart of waking up the people in the compassionate revolution is simply to show you your power, not to show you your ongoing victimhood. That's real, and there are plenty of places you can go to continue to focus on your victimhood, but I want to show you your power. I want us to be made aware of our victimhood so that we can move into our truth and our power. I want to show you who you really are and why they've worked so damn hard to keep the compassionate people down. Why have they worked so hard to keep the compassionate people compliant? Well, the reason why is twofold. First of all, it's just plain practical. Because, as I said, the truth is our compliance is what allows the whole dysfunctional thing to keep happening. The houses of cards cannot run without us. Because there's a lot of us, and they need us. We are the compliant cogs in the wheel that make the whole thing work. They cannot have us quitting. But secondly, if we were to become aware of our power, the whole thing wouldn't be able to work anymore. Not just because we'd all quit, but because as we came into our power, we'd all start dreaming of what an ideal world would look like. And then because we are now aware of our power, we'd start creating it. And we're a wildly talented bunch. And we are good at what we do. We are hard workers and we care. And there are a lot of us. Healers and poets, engineers and builders, artists and educators, organizers and dreamers, thinkers and feelers. Together, if we are awake to our power, we can create and build a world that's actually fun for humans to live in, that's actually good for humans to live in, and good for the planet too. And we would have a blast doing it. We would not build houses made of cards for humans to have to live in. The world's had enough systems like that. We would build from real and lasting stuff, heart-centered ways of being human, based on love. And we'd not think in terms of how we could extract resources from the conquered, or how we could conquer it all, or how we could take advantage of the weak, or how we would organize hierarchies in order to profit off of those at the bottom. All of that stuff would be done with. Because we'd celebrate diversity. We'd delight in peace and harmony. We'd nurture and nourish the seeds of love and kindness. We'd rejoice in creativity. We'd think in terms of what would be the most lovely and harmonious and delightful and fun for the humans. How could we thrive? What would set everyone up for the best opportunities for optimal well-being? There'd be so much play, so much laughter, so much creativity. That's how we'd think and plan and create it. And we could do it too. Can you imagine? I mean, we are really hard workers by nature. We are heart-centered by nature. Can you imagine if we all woke up and began reimagining this world? It would happen. This is what will happen once enough compassionate people wake up to their true power and their gifting. So they don't keep us down just because they need us to run their systems. They keep us down because we're actually the biggest threats. If you are currently in a place yourself where you're really questioning your adherence to a certain set of beliefs, it might be your faith in a group or a system. It might be in your relationship right now. It might be in a way of doing life that no longer feels like it's operating for your highest good. I want you to know you are not alone. And I also want you to take courage from this. All houses of cards are going to fall. And that means the ones we're in, not just the ones everyone else is in. If it's a house of cards, it's falling. And that means we can either do this the easy way or the hard way. It's happening either way. So we can either participate in the process by cooperating with the flow, allowing ourselves to ask the hard questions when they come up, allowing ourselves to seek our truth even though it feels a bit scary at times, or we can cling to our houses made of cards as they're shaking and falling, and we'll get hurt a lot worse because we were trying to fight the inevitable, because we were going against the flow of what's happening. All houses of cards are falling and we can't stop it. They need to fall. The first time the House of Cards metaphor was given to me was when I was actually using one of my own intuitive art therapy tools to get some help for myself. These tools I was given, they're so good at pulling out deep bodily wisdom, the truth in the most uncanny of ways. So at the time, I was in a relationship where I found myself just not wanting to ask certain questions, kind of because I didn't want to admit the truth. And the reason I couldn't admit the truth was because I knew deep down the relationship likely needed to end. But I was so attached to it. I was so attached to that person. I was so attached to having a positive outcome for so many reasons that I couldn't bear to see the truth. I felt like I would die if I admitted the truth. So I kept trying to sweep dysfunctional dynamics under the rug. And I kept trying to work harder to make things work, which you know what that does, It's so destructive to the physical body, to the emotional health. But anyways, we'd had this terrible fight and I was so hurting. And so I decided to consult with one of my art therapy tools, one of the ones that gets you into that altered brain state where suddenly that deep wisdom is available. And as I was doing it, it got a little too real. I still actually remember to this day, even though this was quite a while ago, I remember almost like watching myself draw out the picture and write down the words that came up. I even still have this picture somewhere saved in one of my files with my journal entries. But the words that came up were, Molly, you cannot build a home with a house of cards. In short, this is not something you can fix. You cannot find stability in something that is inherently unstable. The things that create a solid relationship, the things that are needed to create a solid relationship, they are not here. And my stomach literally dropped. I felt the truth of those words go so deep into me, and I knew that I already knew it. It just came up into my consciousness now. And yet, check this out. I knew it was true. But the second I came out of that altered brain state and went back into my limited thinking brain, my thinking brain, which at that time was still totally in charge of me, was like, nope, no, not going to do it. We have to make this work. The end. So I tucked that paper in a file folder, put it away, and proceeded to try to save that relationship for about 2 more years because I was just so attached to what I thought had to happen. I was so attached to making a home in that house of cards. And I learned a very valuable lesson through trying to avoid the lesson. It ended up being a very uncomfortable, very painful, but a deeply important classroom for me on my boundaries journey, on the journey of my own awakening. And I think probably for the other person too. But all that to say, I speak from experience here and there's no judgment. Just a warning, a loving warning. When you try to prop up a house of cards and keep it from falling, I promise you, you're going to get hurt far more than you will if you just let it fall organically. You can pick the harder classroom if you want to, but you don't have to. It can be a lot easier. And one other thing I learned that's helped me so much in the future is this. When you try to prop up a house of cards that is falling, you yourself are actually standing in the way of growth. And not just for you, but everybody. Everybody involved. Because keeping the house of cards propped up blocks real healing, real change, real building, real stability from being able to grow and be created in its place. Not all destruction is bad. Some destruction is simply clearing the way, releasing the old forms, releasing what is horrible for the humans to have to live with so that the new life-giving things can come and grow in its place. Let go of the house of cards, and you will help usher in the healing and the heart-centered change that you so desperately long for. So if you are currently finding things falling apart in your life and you're wondering, is something's wrong with you? I want you to know nothing's wrong with you. This is what is happening. It's what's happening right now for so many of us. And you're finally seeing with clear eyes. When it comes to houses of cards, here are some basic rules. Anytime you have someone in power who is happily causing suffering to people who don't have power, you can be assured this is not the way. This is a house made of cards. Anytime, whether this is on the micro or the macro, anytime you have somebody engaging in violence, claiming it will bring peace, you can be assured this is not the way. It is a house made of cards, and it will not be able to bring stability because it is inherently unstable in its very makeup. Anytime you have a system or organizational structure telling you that the path to your awakening is in handing over your brain to them and letting them do your thinking for you, letting them tell you how to feel, letting them tell you what to believe, you can be assured that is not the way. That is not a path of thriving, no matter how much it promises to be. Because love honors free will. Love does not brainwash. It would not dishonor you like that. Love does not ask you to hand over your brain. It asks you to come level up your brain into your full truth. Really, the energy of a group or a system tells you everything. As we learn to be more and more comfortable reading energy, we gain so much more information that will be so helpful, because houses of cards are fearful and controlling because they are unstable. So if the energy of a group or a system, whether it's micro or macro, if the energy of the group moves you more into fear and less into love, or more into handing them control of you and away from your own sovereignty, pay attention. Ask questions. If the energy of a group or a system moves you more into hate and less into your heart-centered openness that is your natural state of being, you can be assured that is not the way. Houses of cards are quick to promote hate because that's the best way for them to harness your energy. Strong feelings of hate or fear create a natural loyalty and buy-in. So the people who live in the house of cards are now bought in, and hating all those supposed enemies keeps you from noticing how those in power are feeding off of you. Houses of cards work very hard to keep you hating others or afraid of others so that you won't have any energy left to see what's really happening. But my friends, the systems built on fear and abuse of power, they're coming to an end. Those of us who are out, let's welcome with compassion those coming out of them, because more and more are going to be coming. And that's a good thing. Greet them with love. And that includes treating our own selves with compassion for the ways in which we've been tricked by these toxic systems. Treat your own self with compassion as you wake up and realize the ways in which you'd been conditioned to prop systems of abuse up. It's time for a massive shift in how we do humaning. And we're doing it. And as more and more of us compassionate people wake up, we can actually do this with a great degree of safety because of our numbers. We have a level of safety our ancestors could only dream of. We can do this together. And how do we wake up? It's not as hard as you might think. We discover who we really are. And we must discover our true boundaries and learn how to live in them. We must begin to live from our heart. We must begin to feel into the energy of a thing and walk towards love. We let the houses made of cards fall. We don't waste our energy trying to prop them up thinking that will bring stability, because it won't. It'll just drain your energy and they're going to fall anyways. You have to find what's solid for you, for the humans. And this is why boundaries work becomes so important during times like these. This is why I'm so passionate about it, because our true boundaries provide us with the inner structural support we need. We've been given houses of cards and told these are our boundaries. It's such bullshit. Our true boundaries are like our bones. So strong, nourishing, enriching to our being. Our true boundaries are made of the same stuff we see all around us in nature. Our true boundaries are the structure of our expansion, the blueprint for how humans will thrive. And that's why true boundaries work is actually also radical self-discovery, because it is a dismantling of how we've been programmed to be and to think of ourselves, and a radical shift in how we understand we can show up for this life. It's like going from caterpillar to butterfly. Actually, that's what I designed my boundaries program to be, is a cocoon, because it provides a radical reset. Because I'm talking about the actual boundaries of being, like what it means to be a human really, how to show up for this life as a human in your expanded power and glory and love, so that you can be the medicine you're here on this planet to be. All houses of cards are falling. And this is, in one sense, scary and hard. And yes, it's more than fair to admit that. I hate the part where a whole lot of vulnerable people are getting hurt and will get hurt. I hate that part so much. Ugh. But then I also remember that because these houses of cards have been existing for so long, propped up by all the people who are compliant with them, vulnerable people have been being hurt for millennia. Vulnerable people have been being so deeply harmed by our adherence to these systems of dysfunction and oppression. And houses of cards have been chewing up humans for as long as they've existed. So while I do not rejoice in the harm being done as they fall down, I rejoice in the long-term outcomes. I rejoice in knowing that the end of these systems is here and that the beautiful seeds of a whole new way of being are carried inside of us. You and I have the seeds of the new way. It's wild, right? So exciting. You and I are here because we contain within us the change that the world needs. You are filled with compassion and empathy and high levels of responsibility and a desire to help, a desire to give. You're filled with generosity and love because that's what the humans are going to grow into, and you already have it. You are here to be the model of it for other humans to witness. But you cannot be a model of it if you're disempowered. You cannot be a model of it if you have no idea who you really are. You cannot be a model of it if you're still functioning under the dysfunctional boundaries you were given. Because you're still busy keeping the people pleased, or you're so exhausted and burned out from overgiving and overhelping. The thought of helping with anything else makes you just want to start screaming. You have nothing left, right? They've drained you. Or maybe you're stuck in a toxic relationship, so all of your energies are just going into this bottomless pit of chaos and emotional pain. You can't be the medicine while they still own you. Stepping into your true boundaries is imperative. That's where our power is. It's imperative. That's why I'm here doing what I do. That's the reason my whole boundaries program exists, so that awakening humans can finally see and know their true boundaries so that they can shake off the chains we've all been born into. Because it is time to heal and transform and go set this world ablaze with joy and love and heart-centered power. You are beautiful. You are an exquisite human being, and you're here for a purpose. And it's time for you to find that purpose. It's time for you to discover who you really are, not who they told you you are. It's time for you to fully awaken to your power. And for those who need it, it's time for you to begin a true boundaries journey and discover the actual foundational structure, the real one, for how you get to show up as an awakened human on this planet. And as you find it, your heart is going to unfold like an incredible flower opening up. You think your heart is big now? It hasn't even bloomed yet. Just wait till you find your true boundaries, and your heart gets to release itself into its fullness. You haven't seen nothing yet. And it's not just you. Can you imagine a world full of you? A world full of awakening, compassionate people blooming, operating fully in their power. This is our world. This is actually what is happening right now. It's just not showing up yet. But it is happening right now. And you are a part of it. So exciting. It literally makes my whole body just fill with excitement. But I suppose I better bring this into a close for now. I could talk about the joy of this forever. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for resonating. Thank you for giving yourself permission to listen and feel into the truth of this. Whatever parts are true for you, please receive them. And until next time, remember, love is the way. And you are worthy of that love, just as much as anyone else. My compassionate friend, I am so glad you're with us. We are the compassionate revolution. We are the change the world needs, and we're becoming it. If you loved this episode, please share it with a friend or give this podcast a 5-star review. I'd appreciate it so much. And if you'd like to get practical and work with me more closely on boundaries, you can come visit me at boundaried.com. That's boundaried with a D.com for amazing resources. Because this is how we do it. One action at a time. We are moving into our power. And I'm so proud to be in this movement with you.